Good afternoon, dear friends from South Africa. As a fellow South African, I'm very pleased and I feel privileged to have this opportunity to speak to you. And thank you for Edvectus for inviting me to this webinar. We'll go through the slideshow where I will give you some of the tips that I would like to share with you from my own experience here. I've been here for close to 10 years. I've come into the Abu Dhabi Emirate as a cluster leader working for one of the providers that was involved with the public-private partnership, which lasted for about 3 or 4 years. After the project, I was working for a group of schools, nurseries, and eventually we established the teacher training center in Al Ain actually, and then I moved to Dubai for 2 years as a principal, and currently I'm working as an academic vice principal in one of the Cycle 2 boys schools here in Abu Dhabi. And I also am sometimes used, quite often actually, as one of the interview panel members for new EMT teachers. If we look at the context of Abu Dhabi, it's important to know what you can expect when you arrive here. The Abu Dhabi Education Council, ADEC, is relatively young. Before it was always the Minister of Education taking care of all education aspects here in this emirate. The organization is chaired by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, to innovatively improve education to compete with the best education systems in the world, striving to be in the top 10 countries in the world eventually in terms of education. So moving forward, if you look at the context further, you will probably arrive in one of two scenarios. You might be deployed in a government school that is extremely modern, with large classrooms, a lot of natural sunlight, very well resourced, wonderful specialist facilities. Sometimes the Learning Resource Center will be stretching over 2 levels. But on the other end, you could possibly be deployed in a very, very old school building. Small classrooms, a lack of sufficient specialist facilities, and you may land up in either one of these two, so be ready for it. Something to take note of is that in all the Abu Dhabi government schools, they actually block a lot of websites that we as teachers find extremely useful. So, for example, YouTube videos will not always be able to be played in the classroom environment over the Wi-Fi of the school. So you will have to make other plans, maybe MP4 or other formats to eventually use those videos. Let me just see. When you land up in a school, you can expect a wide variety of leadership and management styles. You can land up in a school where you've got Emirati principals with AVPs from Western countries. You can land up in a school where you might have a Westerner as a principal with a Westerner as an AVP, an academic vice principal, and mostly you would have Emirati people in the roles of student services vice principal and social workers who deal with the behavior in the schools. Many new teachers joining schools in Abu Dhabi find it especially difficult to cope with the lack of support from senior management. It is essential in your interview and also to be aware that when you arrive here, you have to be able to address behavior management issues very, very effectively and be able to do it on your own, not necessarily expecting the support of senior management to be available as we might be used to back home. Who will interview you? Usually the panel will consist out of 2 people, and mostly it will be academic vice principal and an academic quality assurance officer, or both academic vice principals or both academic quality assurance officers. The academic vice principals would mostly be Westerners with a lot of experience in schools, and AQIOs would be people that are normally advising teachers across a number of schools with regards to curriculum and assessment issues, which if you are successful, you might eventually meet these people in the school. General expectations, if you look at what the interview panel will be looking for, generally speaking, it's extremely important that you speak very clearly and fluently, because the panel would like to assess if your accent would be something that the students can actually understand. So that's why this is such an important aspect in your interview. Make sure to keep a sense of humor under all circumstances. Demonstrate enthusiasm. Demonstrate your love and your passion for education, and make sure that they can read in all your answers that you always place the needs of your students first. Avoid speaking theoretically, and make sure to not read off notes when you're in a video cam situation. Make use of every single opportunity to describe authentic examples of what you have done before in the classroom, because that is what the panel would like to hear, to assess if you would be a good fit for the government schools here in Abu Dhabi. In most cases, the panel will make an effort to finish an interview in less than 20 minutes. Usually, an interview will consist out of 3 or 4 parts. Number 1, you would have a short introduction, and the interview panel would have a list of details they have to confirm with you, including a few things that I've mentioned on the slide. Make sure at this stage already that you are interviewed for the appropriate cycle that you are qualified for and experienced in. It has happened in some of my own interviews that I was interviewing for cycle 3 or cycle 2 and quickly realized that the candidate was actually a cycle 1 specialist. So make sure at that point that you do it. Usually the second question will be very, very general in nature, in an effort to put you at ease, to make sure that you get rid of that original nervousness that most of us would have in an interview situation. Next would probably follow a few questions or scenarios that the panel would basically describe a situation in a classroom and would test your flexibility in those situations. Then focus on maybe a description of one of your lessons that you've done in the past that you found to be very effective, and try and assess what you would see as good practice in terms of classroom practice, behavior management strategies, and dealing with students who don't have English as their first language. Mostly one of the 2 on the panel would be a subject specialist also, and would use this opportunity to also check your subject knowledge if it's at the level of the position that you're applying for. Make sure that at the end of the interview, if you have any questions not related to HR issues, that you then ask them to the panel. But avoid asking questions that you could actually clarify with the agency or with the HR. What will the panelists be looking for? They would basically try and assess your competency, your flexibility, and responsibility. Competency would focus on your subject knowledge. Very specific questions will be asked regarding positive behavior management strategies and also strategies to deal with students with English as another language or English as a second language. And then especially in cycle 3, they would probably ask you questions with regards to STEM teaching. Flexibility, they would probably sketch a scenario of an unexpected incident or event and try and assess or evaluate how you would deal with that in a situation here. How would you deal with poor communication? That's a common problem that many people face. It can happen that suddenly, a day before a parent-teacher interview, evening or event, you are notified about it. And it's not like we are used to sometimes being notified well in advance. They will try and assess how you would deal with different cultures. You're not only working with Emirati students, but with a variety of students from other countries, usually other Arab countries, and also in terms of the staff that you are dealing with, you'll be working with a variety of people from a lot of different backgrounds and cultures. It sometimes happens here that there are changes in the curriculum or the assessment models or procedures, and they will try and assess how would you deal with sudden changes. Responsibility-wise, one of the main areas of concern with EMTs, English medium teachers here, is that many of the teachers are absent quite frequently. So they will definitely, possibly within a question, try and assess in terms of your attendance. Do you have regular attendance or not? Would you, when you arrive here, have regular attendance or not? Make sure that you request support whenever it's necessary in a school situation. Take that responsibility. Make sure that you take responsibility to care for the students in every scenario that you are faced with. And make sure that you show evidence of applying guidance that might be given to you after lesson observations or walkthroughs. When any senior member of staff provides you with some guidance or some tips, make sure to show evidence that you are taking it very seriously and applying it when the next observation happens. That will be all for the regional session. I'll now go over to some tips that I might have with regards to some of the issues we've just discussed. You will notice that the slide I have up is basically a repetition of what I've discussed in the first few slides already. Some tips I would like to share with you when asked about positive behavior management strategies in lessons. It's important to realize that, as I've shared earlier, in some schools you will find very effective and consistent policies with regards to behavior management and discipline. When this is the case, you should be extremely thankful and make sure that any in-class systems or procedures that you use, or any strategies that you use that you found effective in the past, that it links with the school-wide policy and procedures. Unfortunately, many schools do not have consistent policies, and for different reasons. Some schools don't even have a policy. The school where I am working now, when I arrived, there was no policy in the school to deal with disruptive students. Maybe there is a policy on paper, but the management is not insisting that it is actually applied consistently. Maybe you might have disciplinary personnel, for example, the social workers or the student services vice principal or the principal, who are not available in the school at the time when you might need their support. Sometimes you might have the personnel there in the school available, but when they have to take action, they don't actually take the appropriate action. And then also a big problem is sometimes they do take the action, but they don't report back, they don't communicate what has happened. And this is a cause for a lot of frustration and misunderstandings. My own experience, I've seen that the following points are mostly things that work really effectively in the environment here in Abu Dhabi government schools. It is extremely important to understand the importance of being very, very well prepared for all your lessons. Make sure that everything is ready in terms of differentiated activities. Make sure to have a lot of student-centered activities. Avoid having a lot of teacher talk time. The talk and chalk style here is very ineffective, as in most other countries. Make sure that when you arrive, you agree with your students on classroom rules and routines that will be consistently followed by everybody. And make sure that these are displayed somewhere in the classroom, if necessary with some translation or pictures. When applying this, be extremely firm with the group, change the tone of voice if necessary, but make sure that the students understand that you care for them and that you are trying to create a safe learning environment to allow them to learn optimally. Make sure to build relationships with the students. It takes time, but usually within the first 2 months, if you take enough care, they love to build relationships with you. And like most students in the world, they love to please you, and they would like to do something where they can receive recognition from you. Make sure that your instructions are extremely clear, and not only verbal instructions. You could possibly add instructions on a piece of paper that you place on a table. You could possibly write down the instruction on the whiteboard or the interactive whiteboard or on the PowerPoint that you're using, or when you hand out the activity sheets, the instructions are clearly written on there. Do not continue with the lesson if all your students are not engaged and focused and listening to you properly. So don't fall into the trap of just trying to cover material, and if there are disruptive students, just to ignore them and carry on with a small group who may show interest. Make sure that everybody listens and stop everything until they listen, and take the necessary action if there are still further disruption. Make sure to identify individuals or the culprits or small groups of disruptive learners. Avoid speaking to the class if you know for a fact that this is an individual or a small group causing the disruption. Learn from those with more experience in your school. Get permission from your head of faculty or your AVP to go and visit teachers in the school. It might be other EMTs who have been there maybe quite a few years. It might be other Arabic-speaking teachers, to go and visit and observe how they deal with disruptive learners and how they apply positive behavior management strategies in their lessons. Make use of appropriate IT resources. The students love the use of IT resources here. For example, like most of us, we find that Class Dojo is a very effective app that can be used. Nowadays, Plickers also. Some of these apps will allow you also to have an open communication channel to parents if necessary. Make sure that you value authentic praise where necessary, recognition, small rewards. Make sure that you value that. Students thrive on that here in this environment. The next section will deal with some tips that I've taken from a website that I found extremely valuable and helpful, how to deal with English as a second language learners or English as an additional language learners. When you look at this aspect, try and imagine yourself being in a classroom in a country where they speak a language or they teach in a language that you don't understand, and then use strategies that you would have liked your teacher to use in that situation. A few things. The one thing immediately to do is to slow down your speech when you speak to the students. Some of us have the tendency to speak very, very quickly, and they cannot actually catch the words that we are trying to share, especially when it's difficult terminology with regards to some of the subjects. Make it visual. To be an animated teacher helps. To make use of a lot of pictures and photos helps a lot. Use cooperative learning strategies and group work to reduce the amount of teacher talk time in the class and to throw activities back at them. This will allow them to practice their English and for you to guide and support and encourage in smaller groups. Honor the silent period. This refers to making sure not to force somebody to speak in front of the peers if they're not ready yet. Like all of us, they hate to feel embarrassed, and honor that, respect that, and then slowly bring them to the point of having enough confidence to speak confidently in front of others. Allow scaffolding with their native language. It's not necessary to learn Arabic to be able to speak it fluently, but it might be very helpful to speak to your colleagues or to gifted and talented students in your classroom or student leaders in your classroom to find out the Arabic phrase or word for some of the key terminology that you are trying to teach the students in the classroom. Support where possible with culturally unique language. A lot of the Western phrases we use, they don't necessarily understand, and one should be very careful to assume that they understand the nuances of the English language because they're from a completely different background and culture. Use sentence frames to support with academic learning. Don't assume that they can just write a sentence. Many of them cannot, and they need that scaffolding and that support in the classroom. The last section I will cover is more relevant to Cycle 3 students, Cycle 2 students also. STEM teaching strategies. I think we're all aware that STEM is the acronym that stands for science, technology, engineering, math. Science in this case would refer to the natural world. Technology in this case would not only refer to IT but any human-made product. Engineering in this case would refer to the design process that kids need to use to solve problems. And math would basically refer to the language of numbers, the language of shapes, graphs, tables, etc. If you look at good examples of STEM lessons, some of them seem to be very similar than good science lessons. And that is actually the case. There are some characteristics that one should look for in a good STEM lesson. The one would be that the STEM lesson's focus would be on real-world issues. that they can identify with and that they can easily relate to, and to find possible solutions for these real-life issues. Secondly, everything happening in a STEM lesson should be guided by the engineering design process, identifying a problem and eventually experimenting with different solutions and eventually decide on the most appropriate solution. One should allow the students to actually try and fail. Failing in this case is just as important as eventually solving the problem. The process is actually just as important as the result. STEM lessons will usually immerse students in hands-on activities, and the solutions that they will try and find will sometimes then be linked to the natural world, sometimes be linked to human-made products, and many times include the mathematical language that we referred to earlier. STEM lessons involve students in working in productive groups or teams. This is very important, that collaboration, that cooperation, working together as a team is an extremely important aspect when you work with STEM. STEM lessons apply rigorous math and science content to your students' learning. Usually you would find that it is curriculum related, but sometimes it can fall outside the curriculum that you're busy teaching. But math and science is usually a very important aspect in STEM teaching. STEM lessons allow for multiple right answers, not only one correct answer. The process is extremely important, as we discussed earlier. And it's actually fine that different groups or teams may come up with completely different solutions. In the best case scenario, it would be wonderful if you could also involve an art teacher in a STEM lesson when you plan it, or maybe invite them to co-teach or team teach with you, and then the acronym would change. Instead of being STEM, it would change to STEAM, where the A would then actually stand for art included in the rest. I hope this will really help you, and I wish you all the best for the interviews lying ahead. Bye-bye.
I'd like to thank Leonard for his insight and giving us the tips and hints that you will need as you go forward to your interview. But I'd also like to remind you that the people who are sitting on the other side of the computer are on your side. They want you to do well. So make sure that you go in with a positive attitude, that you try to relax as best as you can, and that, you know, if they ask you a question and you actually forget what they've asked you, just slow down, take a breath, and then ask them to repeat the question. They want you to do well, and so therefore you just need to make sure that you are in the right frame of mind and relaxed as you go through the interview process. Your answers will be authentic and flow well if you always refer to your own personal experience once they present you with a scenario or some sort of situation that you might have to deal with. They are looking for people who are flexible, who understand that they can control what they can control and have the ability to not worry about things that are beyond their control. They are looking for people who understand that they need to go with the flow and take the changes as they come, and actually almost recognize that at some stage you may have been asked to do something and then there'll be a change of direction and therefore you will have to do something else. In those situations, they're looking to see from your answers that you are able to take things in your stride. So once you give concrete examples of what you would do in certain situations, you will sail through the interviews.